I'm Christopher Aedo. I work at IBM, and I'm also an open source zealot. I have to give IBM a big thanks for letting me take this keynote slot to deliver what is basically a public service announcement. There won't be any product pitching, and this is the only slide that conforms to our deck template, so I might get in trouble after this. We'll see. So I'm going to start by talking about infrastructure and defining it. It's a big word that means lots of things, different things to different people. It could mean roads, bridges, water supply, things like that. But in our world, we usually think about it as meaning compute, storage, and networking. When we're talking about building software collaboratively, I'm including in the infrastructure the things that we use to build it. So things like repository management. Your code needs a place to live where people can find it and consume it and contribute back. Medieval medicine was based on little more than superstition. Merging code without tests is basically exactly like medieval medicine. So every project should have tests and should have a solid testing infrastructure behind it. Communication. Asynchronous, synchronous. Mailing lists, bug trackers, wikis, and real-time chat. To build a community and to build a project around a community, you need communication. I want to take a minute and give fair credit to the closed and proprietary platforms that a lot of people use to build their software. They have done enormous things for open source, and I believe we would not be where we are today without their help and without what they've put forward and allowed us to do. But at the same time, we're in kind of a dangerous spot where we're relying on a lot of platforms to build our software that we don't have a lot of influence or control over. Why do we need choices when it comes to this? Because sometimes things go wrong. For instance, you're counting on a platform, but you didn't really read the terms of service very carefully, and turns out you run afoul of those terms of service and you get kicked off, and it causes a huge problem for your project. Or worse, you discover that they're making money off of your project in a way you'd never intended and using your data in a way that you didn't think was going to happen. Perhaps you're using a free service, and it's great because it's really cool and it works awesome, and you don't realize that you're going to get to a point where your project gets popular enough to where you exceed that free tier, and suddenly your open source project that's based and run by volunteers and doesn't have any real money behind it gets a $10,000 bill. Now, if you're lucky, you're a really big project when that happens to you, and you can make a big stink and they'll cut you some slack, or you get unlucky. A lot of us make choices on platforms and technologies that we use because they're coming from startups that are doing something really interesting, and they're disrupting the big players, and it's a lot cooler than what's been out there and what the incumbents are offering. But also, a lot of times, startups haven't figured out their business model quite yet, and when that sweet, sweet VC money dries up, they got to shut their doors. Or worse, you made that decision to use that platform because it was really cool and you didn't like what was already out there, but that big player providing the platform or the service that you didn't really like has enough money to buy them and shut them down. At the end of the day, most of these platforms that we're relying on to build software together are run by companies that need to make money. They've got bills to pay, servers to run, employees to care for. If we're not careful, though, we could be in trouble. I know what I'm saying probably doesn't sound very popular right now. I'm kind of like that guy that sits down next to you on an airplane, and as you're taxiing for takeoff, he starts telling you a story about that one time the pilot miscalculated the takeoff weight, and instead of soaring majestically into the skies at the end of the runway, they plowed right into a grove of trees and everyone died. No one wants to hear that story. And I apologize, I sound like that guy right now, I know. But don't worry, it's going to be okay. I'm going to talk to you about a couple of open principles that we can use and think about every time we're deciding which platform, which software, which technology we're going to bank on for our open source projects. So these open principles I'm going to talk about: transparency, interoperability, and influence. So talk about transparency. Do we have visibility into what that company is doing, how they operate, what's on their roadmap, and how they deal with their communities? Do they work in an open way? I'm talking about interoperability. Can we get our data off of their platform, or are we locked in? Are they based on open standards and working in a way that it makes it easy for us to migrate away if we ever choose to? And finally, influence. Are they listening to their users? Are they listening to their non-paying users? Are they listening to the community of people that use them, even when that community doesn't directly benefit their bottom line? There are a lot of choices we can make around in this area that fit all of these. So let me talk about a few of those. For instance, when it comes to repository management, I'm personally a huge fan of Gitlab because I think they're an awesome example of transparency. They do a really, really great job of letting people know how they operate, and I mean, they're virtually entirely open, even though they're a startup that needs to make money. There are a couple other good options you can choose, too. Now, what about testing infrastructure? Jenkins, obviously, it's probably the reigning champion. Everyone uses it, and it's fully open. But Travis CI, they're a really good example of allowing influence. They do an amazing job of listening to their non-paying users and actually working really closely with small and even large open source projects that are not giving them a dime, but they actually care, and they have a track record of caring for their users and taking care of them like that. For chat, IRC is the reigning champion. It's been around for almost 30 years, and if you need the new shiny stuff, there are tons of front ends you can use that offer really cool stuff. It's also a great example of interoperability. IRC works virtually everywhere. You have endless choices of clients and even servers you can run, and you're not locked in. But if you're too cool for Freenode, check out matrix.org, because that's got all the shiny stuff that you might think you have to pay for. And that's also open and distributed and worth looking at. And finally, when it comes to the infrastructure that they started talking about originally, I think people should take a really close look at their providers and whether or not their providers are based on an open platform. And if you choose an OpenStack-based provider, you'll get all three. You'll get transparency, interoperability, and influence, because it's an open source project, and most of these providers that are based on OpenStack actually work really closely with the broader OpenStack community. So we are at a crossroads right now. As open source developers, we are in danger of creating a monoculture around just a few closed and proprietary platforms. It's not the best thing that we could be doing, and if we think carefully, sometimes making the harder choice is the right choice. So if you're wondering who is going to lead us, that's an owl up there saying who? You are going to lead us. Everyone in this room, everyone at this conference, we are the people that our friends, family, coworkers, and executives turn to for guidance. They look to us to ask what to do, and if we make open choices, we can guide the entire industry, and we can get people to make better open choices supporting open software and open standards and open platforms. So remember these three principles and think about them when you're considering software that you might use or platforms you might rely on. Transparency, interoperability, and influence. They can be really good guiding touchstones for you. And if you follow me on Twitter, I'll get you a free puppy. Thanks a lot, everybody.